Today, our economy is witnessing rising prices of fuel, and virtually all commodities like bread, rice, sugar, sachet water, cement, iron rods, and so on, from Makola Market to Abofo Market to Techiman Market to Takrady Market Circle to Kwandu and everywhere across the country, prices are on the rise. Even the price of my favorite Kofi Brookman and Kenke are seeing price increases. These are the stark realities that confront us today. That's according to Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, the Vice President, as he speaks on the economy. So, just how is this debt-ridden, broke economy still resilient and better managed than previously? We'll be fact-checking Dr. Bawumia's presentation on the economy. Sacking absentee MPs. Is it really the case that these 3 MPs who have absented themselves from Parliament for more than 15 sittings in a meeting are the target, or it is just a Joa Safo that the NPP wants removed? Is the process fair, and will it produce an acceptable outcome? Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to deal with the vexed matters. I'm Samson Lardy Anyenini. You're welcome back. Here is Samson's take. Non-functional, ineffective systems, real security threat. This week, National Security Minister Albert Kandapah told judges that when justice delivery is seen to be ineffective or tainted, the security of the state is in danger. If the interpretation of the law is so much tilted in our favor, all the time, people will start accusing the judiciary and will not have the confidence that they need. And quote, what an unfortunate and embarrassing exhortation. The judiciary is a human institution, and it is public knowledge a few unworthy individuals find themselves on the bench and give the noble institution a bad name. Imagine how judges in that national security strategy policy sensitization meeting felt. I mean, those who keep to their oath of fidelity to the law without fear or favor, ill will, or affection. What was their reaction? Unexpressed, however, to such a call. I get attacked by the unprincipled partisans for defending judges, even though I am not unwise to do so blindly. But why won't the minister fear that our collective security is compromised because a family dispute over a small land took 40-odd years to resolve, and Chief Justice Georgina Wood felt compelled to describe that as a parody of justice? Don't tell me that is an exception. It is as indefensible as it is a blight on the system. Sometimes it is not exactly inaccurate, the statement that the law is logic and common sense. By our Constitution, justice emanates from the people and it is to be administered on their behalf by judges. But there have been judgments that did not only upset ordinary people for their obvious perverseness and poverty of reasoning underpinning them, but even those trained in the law got equally appalled at the manifest injustice and illogic in those decisions. They say bad news spreads and citizens are left with the perceptions the minister complains about to justify their resort to conduct that endangers our peace instead of recourse to the courts to ventilate their grievances. This week, Professor Stephen Kweku-Asare wrote criticizing the judgment declaring the Assin North seat vacant, and many share his view that the decision causing fights in Parliament is irrational. He said the case against the MP had nothing to do with him being a dual citizen because he is not. Fact. He argues that the MP who filed to renounce his Canadian citizenship a whole year before contesting the election had no power over when a certificate of renunciation would be issued to him. In fact, when the issue came up, the Electoral Commission assessed and took the firm view that he could contest, and he got lucky. His application was granted in November 2020. He argues that by the time he was elected and sworn in, he had given up his Canadian citizenship and therefore satisfied Article 94 2A of the Constitution that requires that a person shall not be qualified to be a member of Parliament if he owes allegiance to a country other than Ghana, unquote. That is, if the provision had anything to do with dual citizenship at all. He refers to Section 20D of the Representation of the People Law, 1992, PNDC Law 284, to further argue that to cancel the results of an election, it must be proved that the candidate was at the time of his election a person not qualified or a person disqualified for election, unquote. Again, he argues the Supreme Court had held in the Dr. Zanato Rawlings case that the election being referred to is not party primaries, but state-run elections. Professor Asare criticizes the Cape Coast High Court judge for holding that James Gyakye Kwesing owed allegiance to another country other than Ghana, and asks if it will make sense to hold the view that the beleaguered MP owes allegiance to Canada, even if his renunciation application was ignored by that country and he had returned their passport and relocated to his constituency. What if Canada passed a law that it no longer allows renunciation of citizenship? If the system works, why should the assessment and the decision of the independent state entity not suffice? After all, it is the body with expertise in the business of elections and must have capacity and competence to examine and pass nominations as being compliant with the law. May he overcome the procedural obstacles in the appeals he has mounted so that we can benefit from the wisdom of 3, 5, or even more judges to settle this matter, to stop the poison it spreads against the judiciary on account of the decision of a sole judge. Wednesday, I was in the circuit court in Adenta. An accused person got into the dock and complained bitterly that he was being starved in police cells. The judge had to give out money for his feeding until the next court date. I asked the investigator why that was so. He told me that, like many of his colleagues, he does that from his own private pocket. So, the reality is that suspects under his watch will starve if he doesn't have food for them, if he doesn't have money to buy food for them. Dear Minister, the threat to national security is real, not only in an inefficient justice delivery or criminal justice system, but in many sectors. And who is supervising anything for being paid each month without fail? MPs who enjoy long periods of vacation can afford to absent themselves from work without permission for months and without any consequences. unless when we have a hung parliament and a political party's interest is adversely affected. The poorly paid civil servant who doesn't get free money for a V8, free fuel, or fat allowances for doing the job for which they are employed to do, or ex gratia, may get punished or sacked for staying out of work for a day or two without permission, even where there is genuine reason. If you are serious about fighting corruption, you should not find it okay appointing MPs to serve on boards. And for now, with the exception of MP ministers who must serve by virtue of statutory compliance, it is surprising why no MP refuses such an appointment. The president refuses to listen to the CDD on this clear conflict of interest situation. The speaker has joined. Just how do these MPs oversight the institutions they serve as board members? In 1 Thessalonians 5 verses 22 is the summary of the law and most effective approach to fighting corruption. And it is this, quote, avoid every appearance of evil, unquote. Suffering citizens, breaking their backs to survive the harsh realities of the broke economy, and teeming jobless youth saw the president jet off to attend church in America a day after talking austerity and banning wasteful travels by state officials and saddling them with a stealth e-levy on their already taxed income. They see the tweets by respected citizens like David Ofosu-Dote and Bright Simmons. Let the systems work to benefit all, especially the poor and vulnerable. And we would have succeeded in removing or dousing the flames, igniting these threats to national security. And that's my take, with your permission of an extra 3 minutes. We'll be right back.
She requested from the speaker to be given 4 more weeks to be absent. The 4 weeks, I guess, is ending Friday.
Was that approved? Was that granted?
It wasn't granted. The speaker told me that he had not granted that because you need to be here to make the requests. But this was submitted from our side, and even the first one that saw her out, she didn't make any request from the speaker. So the speaker said you're only going to accommodate that. It's been a long drawn matter. We've been having conversations, and I think there's something that is happening. There's something that is happening, and I don't want to go into it. Unfortunate as the situation is, but certainly a decision will have to be taken. One way or the other. One way or the other.
The Constitution is clear what decision can be taken on this.
Absolutely.
The first is Honorable Sarah Adjoa Safo. The second is Honorable Henry Korti. And the third is Honorable Kennedy Ohene Ajapon. Consequently, as is my understanding of the provisions of Article 97(1)(c) and Order 16(1) of the Standing Orders of Parliament, and the decision of the Court of Appeal in the case of Professor Stephen Kweku Asare and the Attorney General and 3 others, I hereby refer the said honorable members to the Committee of Privileges for consideration and report to the House. Since today is the last sitting day of the meeting, I refer it to the committee, and I expect that the committee will submit its report 2 weeks after the House reconvenes. Honorable members, attendance of members is to Parliament, not floor of the Chamber of Parliament. The law lords who ruled earlier on. Most of these things are happening because of the recent judgment of the Supreme Court. And that is the good reason why I asked for a review. The work of a member of parliament in parliament is not restricted to the floor of the chamber. Much of the work of parliament is done at the committee level. And that is why when it comes to the time of voting, the bell is rung for 10 minutes so that at the committee meetings, members can leave the committee meetings and come and vote. You can be on the floor. You can visit the washroom. You can go to attend your constituents. You are in parliament. Being in parliament means being in the presence of parliament.
Mr. Speaker, it will be good to listen to me. When I'm done, you have the privilege to make your
Minority
ruling.
Chief Whip,
You have to first
read the standing orders again.
Mr. Speaker, I have read what I want to read and have stopped where I want to stop.
Honourable
It is only
member,
fair you listen to me. And when you hear me,
will you
Mr.
resume
Speaker,
your
you have
seat?
to hear me first.
Will you resume your seat?
Mr. Speaker, you have to hear me first.
Will you resume your seat?
Mr. Speaker, we heard you in silence. Please, no, leader, no. Mr. Speaker, we heard you in silence. Mr. Speaker, it is only fair that you hear us, and when we are done, after the ruling and the decision to be taken, Mr. Speaker, is absolutely yours. But to listen to us, Mr. Speaker, you must listen to us. And Mr. Speaker, when you are making reference to the ruling of the appeals court, Mr. Speaker, the interesting thing that you left out, and I draw your attention to this, is that when that appeals court made that ruling, it concluded with this. After the court has said that the seat will be declared automatically, it went ahead to say that under the 1992 Constitution, however, it is the High Court which can declare a member of Parliament's seats as vacant, without providing any reasons or legal basis for the assertion. More particularly, when the provisions in question do not either explicitly or impliedly rope in the High Court. This is what the appeals court did. So, Mr. Speaker, with the greatest of respect, we agree you made a statement, but your conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the danger, colleagues, as we sit in this chamber, is this. If we allow speakers to take petition from outsiders, and so motu with petition from outsiders to refer members of parliament to privileges, colleagues, will be doing ourselves the greatest disservice. Because we will one day get a dictator speaker who will simply take statements from outsiders and begin to penalize individual members of parliament. It is on this basis that I call on all of us that to resist the attempt by Mr. Speaker to refer our colleagues to the privileges. And if there is justification, let us get one of us as member of parliament who is convinced that our colleagues need to go through privileges to do that and not to allow speaker to do.
Right, so we are back to Parliament again. This particular Parliament, the 8th, doesn't appear to get off the radar, and often for all the wrong reasons. Well, thankfully, for a while now, we haven't seen any blows and physical attempts to work there. But what exactly is going on in this very august house? The center of what we are practicing, we call a democracy, without which, in fact, we have no democracy. My guest in the studio, John Abdullahi Jinapor, is MP Yape Kosogo and member Finance, Mines and Energy Committees of Parliament. Kweku Kwateng is MP Obuasi West and Chairman Finance Committee of Parliament. Kofi Bentel is lawyer and Senior Vice President of Imani Africa. He joins us via Zoom. Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Right. Okay, so this thing that is started in the House, beginning with Kofi, I want you to give us your preliminary view watching and listening to developments. We had known all along that Adwoa Safo was the target, was a candidate. Unfortunately, or somehow, we get to discover that now 3 MPs are in trouble. So, what do you make of what is going on?
Right. Good morning, Samson. Good morning to everybody. So let's broaden it. Adwoa Safo was the target for a political witch hunt. She was the target for certain people to achieve a certain very narrow political goal. But we need to go back a bit. Before the last election, I was one of the lawyers working with Odikro.
Right.
And we had gone to court on the same issue. And the issue was that there are too many parliamentarians who take monthly salary, take allowances, and they take the perks of their office and they don't go to work. Out of the 275 parliamentarians that we have, it is our reckoning that less than half of them go to work regularly. Less than 50% go to work regularly. And less than 50% contribute to parliamentary discourse, debate, lawmaking, etc. And we think that is a heavy cost on this country. We need to do something about it. Some of us are of the view that we have too many parliamentarians. We are not getting value from them. But if that is what it is, we need to find a way in this republic to make sure that we get as much as we can out of our parliamentarians. So way back then, some of us took the step. Now, that case was never called until the elections were over. Coming forward, that practice continued. And there were still calls that, look, this thing is wrong. People should go to work, and we should get value out of the people we pay to be parliamentarians for, various purposes. Now, it was not heeded until the politicians themselves wanted something done, and they felt that they could invoke this law. That is where Adwoa Safo became a target. My issue is this: we need to find a way to make our parliament effective, and the main role of parliament is to be a check on government. Now, if parliamentarians will not go to work, they cannot be a check on government. If they will go to work also and just vote for the government in power for whatever they want, they will also not be a good enough check on government. You remember when the e-levy issue came up, I said this was a good thing, because ultimately, I think the broader view on all of this is that it is good that this is happening, because now people or parliamentarians will sit up and realize that they have a job they have been paid for and they have to do. And if they don't do it, these are some of the repercussions.
Right.
I, however, hope that it will not just be a matter of parliament. I think more citizens must take it up like Professor Kwekwasari did and got a ruling. And I think the ruling must be enforced so that parliamentarians will feel the need to do what they have been paid to do and what they stood for elections to do.
Right. In 2018, I spoke at one of Odikro's Brown Bag series, lecture series, and I used their own statistic. I was surprised, I was scandalized what I saw in their statistics, even though the MPs have consistently sought to deny the statistics. The fact remains that Odikro has people within the house who are checking their attendance all the time, and what they have is impregnable. So I make a reference and ask you one question. To conduct business, Parliament requires a quorum of 1/3 of the MPs, and that is only 92 of the 275 members. It's been difficult to get this small number, 92 out of 275. It's been difficult to get this small number, and we have seen and heard speakers, speaker after speaker, weep and cry over this conduct. Lack of quorum led to the postponement of the debate of the 2016 budget. Not once, twice. In fact, between January 2013 and July 2014, the average MP missed 1 in every 4 sittings of the House. This increased by 58% by 2015. On June 12, 2015, only 83 MPs were in the House. Over 22% were absent for many sittings without permission. In 2017, 27 MP ministers and 21 MP deputy ministers absented themselves more than 15 times during some 80 sittings. And don't get surprised, they absent themselves without permission. And that's a conduct in complete disregard of the Constitution. Now, guess this. The scandalous thing to find is that at the time, even opposition MPs, who you would think don't have too much to do, and so will go to the House, were equally guilty. NDC MPs constituted 28%, while MPP MPs constituted 72% of those who were absenting themselves in the manner they were doing. Now, Kofi, my question to you is, their standing orders allow the Speaker to grant permission to keep your regular job. That's why you see some of them, like some of the lawyers among them, we go to court, we see them all the time. So you ask, are they really doing the job of the MPs? So if their standing orders allow it, why should we complain? Kofi, please unmute.
Hello, Samson, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Good. We should complain because there are rules for Parliament. And indeed, the rule is that if you are a parliamentarian, it is a full-time job. And if you want to do anything on the side, you need to get the permit or permission from the Speaker so to do. Again, we need to focus on this issue because our parliamentarians over the Fourth Republic have elevated a footnote into a keynote. So almost more than half of parliamentarians are doing work outside Parliament for private profit. Like you say, we meet a lot of them in court. And they have treated the Parliament or the work of Parliament as a part-time job. And that is wrong. If you don't want to do the job of a lawmaker, go and make law, sit in Parliament, debate, listen to debates, then please don't go to Parliament. So we need to complain. And the point I want to make is that it just happens that today it is their parliamentarians who are seeking to invoke that rule to achieve a certain goal. But that was made for a certain broader goal. And the broader goal is that if they do not go to work, they should relinquish the seat.
So now we have a hung parliament.
Yes.
They can't afford the luxury of one person absenting themselves.
Yes.
And the whip is being cracked. What is our complaint again?
We are not complaining. We are just trying to put the thing in context that we should not be doing this only when we have a hung parliament. We should be doing this all the time. We should be requiring of our parliamentarians on the pain of losing their seat to go to work every day, all day, like we do. Because indeed, they are pretty well remunerated compared to other civil servants and public servants. So the issue is this. It is not an anomaly that somebody is requesting that a parliamentarian should go to work, and that if they do not go to work, they should relinquish their seat. The only anomaly here is that that request is being made by parliamentarians or politicians themselves to achieve a certain narrow goal. But this should become the norm. This should become what every citizen does, which is why we should commend people like Odikro who keep tabs on these things. And we should all be minded to stare down and shame those parliamentarians who take the money, take the office, take the perks, and do not go to work. So this is entirely good, and it's one of the good things that come out of a hung parliament. As far as I'm concerned, we should always have hung parliaments because it will create certain dynamics which will bring good things out of the democratic structure we have. This is the first time in this republic that we are having parliament assert itself in this kind of strong way. And all these things are coming out. We are discovering all these laws which already we had. Imagine that if parliamentarians knew, like all of us know, that if you don't go to work, you'll be fired. And they all came to work. Imagine that they took their work as seriously as they are taking it now. Imagine that they came and they will vote and they will rally their people to come in and they will debate and the people will fight for what they believe in every time, all the time. I think our republic will be better.
Okay. Gentlemen in the studio, I suppose you will not be part of those who are guilty as charged. Article 97 says, a member of parliament shall vacate his seat in parliament. C, if he is absent without the permission in writing of the speaker, and he is unable to offer a reasonable explanation to the Parliamentary Committee on Privileges from 15 sittings of a meeting of Parliament during any period that Parliament has been summoned to meet and continues to meet. Then, Order 16 of your standing orders say 16.1. A member shall not absent himself during a meeting for more than 15 sittings without the permission in writing of the Speaker. Any member infringing this order shall have his conduct referred to the Privileges Committee. Kofi's question is what I put to the two of you. Why must we come to the point where you have a hung parliament before you realize that this exists on our books? Yes, Goku.
Well, thank you, and good morning to viewers and to listeners. I think it shouldn't have come to this. We shouldn't have waited as Parliament for it to become politically advantageous to uphold provisions that have been captured in our Constitution and standing orders. And maybe we should look upon this as an opportunity to correct what has been done wrongly in the past. I am a chairman of a committee that sits quite often, and I also have concerns about attendance even at my committee. And I see that on the floor, and I am left in no doubt that something has to be done to correct this. It cannot go on forever. I plead that we do not cut our nose to spite our face. It is true that the current dynamics in Parliament in respect of those who have been referred to the Privileges Committee are coming out of a certain political desire to gain numbers advantage. But we risk also downplaying the rules because we worry that people motivated by politics may succeed even using the laws and the Constitution. So whilst we urge ourselves as members of Parliament to respect these provisions and going forward, if that is the intention of the Speaker, to support the Speaker, to deal with the absenteeism we're seeing, nothing should stop us also, to the extent that it is lawful, to take advantage of these provisions in these times when we have small numbers, when we have tight numbers, to ensure that we take the advantage we can. So my simple answer to you will be that, yes, these rules have been there. We should have been upholding them. We should have been having this discussion much earlier than now. But if it has taken a tight Parliament to bring up the discussion, it is still okay. We still have the opportunity within this to fix what has been wrong for a long time.
John, in a system that works, where the law is clear and your standing orders are clear about what should be done to those who default or breach the law, how does this escape you? Kennedy Japan absented himself without permission for 24 out of 28 sittings. Sarah Adjoa-Safo absented herself without permission for 19 out of 28 sittings. Then you have Henry Korte also absenting himself without permission for 23 out of 28 sittings. How does this happen in the first place?
First of all, it's important to determine the absence from Parliament. If you read, it says 15 sittings, but I know the Speaker has ruled that it should be 15 continuous sittings. That's what the Speaker has ruled. So intermittently, if you absent yourself based on the Speaker's ruling, that is not 15 continuous sittings. Because he says, whilst Parliament continues to sit. So that's the interpretation.
What I read to you is for October to December 2021. Now, guess what is in January to March 2022. January to March 2022, absent for Kennedy Japan, 16 out of 28. For Adjoa Safo, 28 sittings. Henry Korte, 25 out of 28 sittings. This is what we are talking about.
Yes, so what Parliament has done is that they've taken 28 continuous sittings and determined that out of the 28 continuous sittings, you are 24. That, I'm saying so because others try to just look at the 15 different days and say that 27% of MPP MPs, 27% of NDC MPs were not available. So I think that ought to be determined. Two is that the Speaker in his latest ruling has stated that when you are within the precincts of Parliament, which includes attending committee meetings, you are deemed to be present in Parliament. So if you just go and take the vote and proceedings and look at, and you know the votes and proceedings normally will list those who entered and signed in the chamber and not those who attended committee meetings. Because it will list those who signed and entered and list those who were absent, with or without permission, and then attach committee reports. So I think even that one, the House itself must reconcile that. Whilst you are listing the person as absent without permission, if you go to the committee sittings, that same person is listed in the committee sittings as having attended like finance committee meeting. So that's something I think Parliament itself.
You're saying that you will go to Parliament and will not sign up, but
you won't enter the
but
chamber.
You will attend some meetings.
So I attend.
Do you
finance
do that?
Committee.
No, I'm asking
sometimes,
you. Will you do that?
Sometimes we sit at finance committee meeting from 6, let's say from 8 in the morning, and before you realize the House is closed. We've had that before.
Yes, many times.
The committee meeting is so serious, and Chairman knows those of us who sit at the committee meeting. It's so serious like that you even forget that, look, the House is sitting, and maybe by 2 or say sometimes even by 12, the House is closed.
So do you recognize that the Speaker's ruling, so to speak, or that was a communication to you, that being within the precincts should be seen as present? Because that also appears to align with what you read in Eskime.
So that is it. So that's why I'm saying that. So if you just go and take attendance in the chamber and draw a conclusion and say that this person was not in Parliament for, say, 50 days, when out of the 50, probably 5 or 10 or whatever, he was at committee meetings, you ought to be careful how you draw. I'm just saying this because people like to also get involved in our parliamentary work. We all educate each other. We are learning. I encourage Odikro and all those people for what they are doing.
If you are referring to Odikro, Odikro will explain to you that they don't only check those who are present in the House, and they don't only use the book, but they proceed. They used to do that, and the majority leader drew their attention that that was wrong. And then they revised it.
Fantastic.
And try to check to be sure that you are in the House in the first place.
Fantastic.
Right. But you are not saying this to excuse that these three individuals
I'm not coming.
have not
I just
defaulted.
thought I should lay these bases so that we ourselves as Parliament would improve how we report on attendance, how we determine, even like you said, within the precincts of Parliament, can we enhance our standing orders to define what we mean by within the precincts of Parliament, so that it is clear and explicit, so you don't leave room for conjecture. Now we are dealing with trade.
But even if you redefine it, it should insist that you must sign in, even if you have a committee.
Fine, let
meeting.
Parliament do that. I just think that we should bring clarity and certainty to all these issues.
All right.
Now the issue of the three, it is obvious that these three have absented themselves continuously beyond the 15 days. The records clearly show. But when you read the Constitution, it is clear that even when you absent yourself for the 15 days, you automatically do not lose your seat. That ought to be established, that the fact that the person is absented himself for 15 days doesn't automatically result in you losing your seat. Today, I'm going to the constituency. God forbid, I'm involved in an accident. I'm in coma. There's no ID card on me. I'm rushed to the hospital, put on a life support for 1 month before my family is able to trace and even determine that I am there. Do you declare my seat vacant? That is why you ought to be heard. And so I think that they ought to be given a fair hearing. But the truth is that sometimes, let's face it, there are some political issues here. And that is where the challenge then comes. Because if you listen to members of the MPP, they always talk about Adwoa Safoa's absence. I haven't heard even one single MPP MP complain about Kennedy Japon's absence, complain about Henry Quartey's absence. But you've heard numerous MPP MPs consistently complain about Adwoa Safoa's absence because on certain critical decision-making periods, they expect her to be in Parliament in order to shore up the numbers. So the intention behind this whole issue of you being absent is another matter. Let's see how it goes. Don't forget that the Chief Whip already is even challenging the decision by the Speaker on his own to refer the matter to the Privileges Committee. And I'm told that he has even filed a motion. That ought to be determined even by the House.
Yes.
Whether when someone believes that you've absented yourself, it ought to be raised on the floor of Parliament before it is referred to the Privileges Committee, or the Speaker on his own through communication can refer the matter to the Privileges Committee. So these
to start with, I think a part of his contention is that order 70, somewhere in order 70, 75 thereabout, says that, talks about petitions. And it says petitions must be brought only by MPs.
Petitions to Parliament.
Yes, only by MPs, for the purpose of MPs, Parliament's consideration, only by Parliament. In this case, the person who has brought the petition is not an MP. So his argument number one is that the Speaker doesn't have the power to bring such a matter before the House.
It's the communication the Speaker gave. The Speaker said he has received several petitions. So that is the underlying issue. He says, I've received several petitions from civil society and others. And so I caused the table office to do a check for me. They then adduce the evidence to me, and based on that, I'm referring it. Then Muntaka says, Speaker, hold it. Yes, you might have received petitions, but in accordance with our standing orders, those petitions must be raised by members of Parliament. So if the public believes that something ought to be raised, probably lobby Kwaku or lobby Jinapo, let me raise it on the floor, the Speaker hears it, and then makes that directive. So it's quite thin.
The order is order 76.1. It says, and the side note is petitions, and the title of that part 11, is papers, petitions. It says, every application to Parliament shall be in the form of a petition, and every petition must be presented by a member.
You know, Samson, I think we are getting into the problems that Kofi Bento complained about. I think there's a much bigger issue about the MP's absenteeism. And probably today's discussion focuses on the political matters that have come to Parliament. So maybe we can grant that. But I wish that there will be an opportunity to discuss absenteeism generally, the technicalities about being in committees and all that may be raised, and we should find ways of clarifying those areas that are not clear. But we cannot overlook the fact that absenteeism, it's a problem. And
almost every speaker has complained about it.
And I look at the UK Parliament especially, and sometimes I see very few people in their chamber, very few. I see that in other parliaments. Perhaps we should find out the workings of Parliament in those areas. And to the extent that Ghanaians are concerned about the absence of their members of Parliament from the chamber and from Parliament, see what path we as Ghanaians want to chart. I don't want us to quite mix that up with the other matters that have come. Absenteeism is a real problem.
But this small one, where do you stand?
Yes, I'm going to that.
MPs should be given permission to do their job in addition to representing the people in Parliament. Because your orders allow that, you apply to the Speaker and he gives you a waiver so that you are able to keep your job.
No, there's a committee.
But
Yes, should that be there? Should that be there?
You should ask
that you are an MP,
you
should be giving leave to do your continual...
You should ask that question across the public sector. All right? If somebody is a public servant and they come to work regular times, are they allowed after work to do anything for additional income? If you are the chief director, you have a small shop in your house, you close work at 5 o'clock. Are you allowed to go and sit in that shop and sell? So we should be fair and ask that question across the public sector.
What do you think? It's a question I asked to you, and I want
I'm answering.
John to
you see,
answer.
I'm expanding it because it is impossible to say no to MPs. If I close work, I close Parliament, I've closed my committee meetings, I am in my room, I'm at home, and somebody comes for consultancy advice, and I can advise for money. You say we should make it impossible for the MP to do that. Or if, as a member of Parliament, I close work, and I have a small shop close to my house, am I allowed to sit at that shop and sell? These are matters that I think we should not take members of Parliament away from what happens generally in the public sector. We may want to find out what happens in other places. I think that should be permissible, except that if you have to be in Parliament, be in Parliament. If you have to be in committee meetings, be in committee meetings. How you use your time after work is your own business. And if there's a requirement that you should seek leave in order that you can engage in profit-making, I think it is more to be sure that that profit-making activity does not in any way get in the way of your main job as an MP.
Okay.
That is the concern there. But I do not think you can say that.
You share the same view?
Yeah, you see, first of all, you are even referred to a committee. The Speaker on his own, sole moto, cannot just decide that, go ahead and do that. There's a full committee that evaluates your application and determine whether that is a committee on members holding office of profit, whether it would conflict with your work, whether it will impede with your work before they grant it. Because Samson, I pay my driver, I pay my secretary, I pay my research assistant, I pay half of my vehicle, I buy my own fuel. I try to be very effective in Parliament. If I want to be effective, the 9,000 cedi wouldn't do it. Let's be frank. The 9,000 cedi I earn a month.
You are not talking about the other things.
Like what?
We know the 9,000 is not what you earn.
So I think that once it doesn't conflict with my work, it doesn't impede my work, I can be a board member of a private company and bring my expertise to that office. Okay. I may be giving some.
All right, thank you. Now, proceed to the substantive matter.
The substantive matter. I have looked carefully and I've spoken with many more senior members of the House on this matter. And if you look at Order 76.1, which you read, which is a petition to Parliament, and it's very important that you stress the word Parliament, a petition to Parliament, the requirements on that are very clear. You ought to be a member of Parliament. And in fact, it's not just being a member of Parliament. You need to take the process through the House. And in some cases, there ought not to be a debate. In some cases, there ought to be a debate. And effectively, you'll be dealing with a motion, which motion then would be decided upon by the House. But 76.1 itself excludes matters of breach of privilege from all these requirements. If you read 76.1, it says all these do not, what is following, the requirement of doing that does not include matters of breach of privilege. But in 76(1), petitions to Parliament...
It says a petition not relating to a breach of privileges of the House, and which, according to the rules or usual practice of the House, can be received, shall be brought to the table by the direction of Mr. Speaker.
Exactly. So it's taking out petitions relating to issues of privilege under 76(1). You see that very clearly.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say how it must be treated. Again, if you go to 164(1) speaks about the Privileges Committee. But 164(2) then goes on to say how matters must be referred to the Privileges Committee. And there again, you see clearly that it ought to be a decision of the House to refer the matters to the Privileges Committee. You see that. But 76 deals with petitions. And then I think it says petitions and something. But it deals with petitions. 164 deals with normal committee work. You know, normal parliamentary committees and how they work. If you look at the section 30 and 31, which I'm sure the Speaker derives the rightness of what he did from, it deals with privileges. There it is very clear. Privileges and contempt, breaches of privileges and contempt of Parliament.
Right.
That is the section that deals with that. And you go to 30.
Disorderly conduct, misbehavior,
and that is in 30.
Persistent or willful disobedience of general rules, you know.
It lists all of them. And then it comes to 31 and says, where there's a complaint in relation to these matters, the Speaker would refer it to the Privileges Committee. I see somewhat a conflict. Because in 31, you don't get a sense at all that it must be taken through the requirements that are listed in 76(1). You don't get it. It says wherever a complaint...
It says in all cases of proceedings.
Yes.
Where complaint is made of a breach of privilege.
Yes.
Or contempt of Parliament, Mr. Speaker may direct that the matter be referred to the Committee of Privilege.
Yes. Let me finish with this point.
I just wanted you to draw this distinction.
Yes.
Privileges as against attendance to Parliament. If you do not attend Parliament, does that amount to any privilege?
Certainly not.
It's a breach of
privilege. So don't mix privileges
attendance
and attendance.
Is not a question of privilege, should it?
So don't let us mix the two.
Okay.
But there's no place. Look, unless we consider absenting yourself from Parliament. You consider it under 30G, Samson, the provision you read. Unless you consider that, then there's even no space under our standing orders to deal with absenteeism. So what I'm saying is that 31 ought to consider absenteeism as breach of privilege. There's no.
Which I disagree.
Okay, that is fine.
I disagree.
But when I look at 31, I don't get the sense that the Speaker erred, and I don't get the sense that it ought to have been raised by a member. I think there is space there for the Speaker to have done this. At the very best, you can say that there is doubt. And when there is doubt, you will go to Order 5, and again, it's the Speaker that would decide what ought to be, given the doubt. But Samson, just to respond briefly to Jinapo on this question of whether absenteeism should be considered to be a breach of privilege. If you look at the order of business under Order 53, there is no room for breach of privilege. It has room for contempt of Parliament. There is no room there. The whole place, there is no room for breaches of privilege. So I can only say that the Speaker under 31 referred this to the Privileges Committee, and that ought to be proper.
Okay.
Just a quick one, Kwako.
Yes.
Generally, this house, our house, you can raise any matter as a member of Parliament, provided you go through the right processes. That is one. You must apply to the Speaker. If the Speaker admits it, you come to the House, you move that motion. Yeah. Once it is seconded, it is before the House. and then the House would determine what it wants to do. So that general framework addresses virtually anything that ought to come before the floor for debate and for decision making. And so I thought that if you, the majority side, felt that this very issue was that topical, you had every opportunity to raise that on the floor of Parliament, second it, we discuss it, and then it is referred to the committee. It would have been tidier, it would have been neater, and you wouldn't have put the Speaker in this difficult situation that we find ourselves. It's my personal opinion, but I'm entitled to that.
So one of your colleagues says that the Speaker had power under 31 and 53 1D to do what he did. He says that Article 97 1C considers absence of Parliament to be an incidence of breach of privilege. It considers it to be an incidence of breach of privilege, and that Muntaka was horribly wrong with his challenge to the Speaker.
But something happened on the floor that
right. So
just I beg you 1 minute.
So
your side, the majority
people are
side,
asking a question.
maintain that even the privileged committee had no business.
I want us to move away from the technicalities.
Yes, we will come there.
I want us to move away from the technicalities so that we don't spend too much time on this. Let me get Kofi in now. Kofi, some members of the public are concerned, and they are actually curious that it takes NDC MP or MPs, at least we know of one so far, that is complaining in a situation where they, quote unquote, stand to benefit, that 3 MPs from the MPP side are going to suffer. Some can't see their way clear with that. But Muntaka insists that he's fighting for procedure, principle, and for the future. That if things are not done right, a dictatorial speaker can invite petitions from outside, from anybody, and through that remove an opposition member that they are not happy with.
Yeah, and I think whoever is thinking that way is justified. There is a general feeling in the Ghanaian public that MPs will always unite to protect their interests, even if it is against what the people want. So you see MPs agreeing on their loans and all those other things. The details we can discuss, but clearly, when you have a situation where MPs are going to be put under some sort of scrutiny, and I can see Honorable Muntaka looking into the future and guessing that, look, this can turn around, and then you would have some of my people or myself coming under, the same kind of pressure. So he's trying to do it now to prevent any future occurrence. But when you do that, you are actually bulwarking the institution of Parliament against the people. It is the same Parliament also which will exact privileges against people who criticize them or say things that they don't like. So you have a creeping situation where Parliament is trying to extricate itself from any kind of control. Now, that is wrong. It must never be allowed. We need to establish this fact that parliamentarians are employees of the people. And especially to the extent that there are rules that require you to go to work. I have been listening to the banter between Kwati and Mr. Ginapo, and it's all technical, whether it's right or it's wrong. Here are the fundamental issues. There is nowhere that you can refuse to go to work for an elongated period of time and expect that your job will be there, you come back and you continue. There is no company where more than 50% of the people refuse to go to work consistently, and that company is going to work well. And I agree with Mr. Kwating. If you finish your work, after your work is done, and you go and sit in your shop and you do your consultants, that is fine. The same thing must be done with MPs. They should come to work, finish their work, and go and do the other jobs that they want to do. That is not what we see. We see a situation where, again, more than 50% are consistently not going to work at all and spending their time doing other things. The other issue that must be clarified for our people is this. If somebody is saying that the technicalities do not allow the speaker to do what he did, and I'm glad that another person came and said he is very much allowed to do what he did. Indeed, it is our view that a person who has absented themselves for 15 sittings and is not consecutive, has actually vacated their seat. And that was the gravamen of the judgment that Professor Asare got. So it is a matter that has happened. Once you do that, you vacated your seat. And it is for either the clerk or, I believe, the speaker to declare it as such. So if you say by some technicality a petition cannot do this, then we will end up suing the speaker. Okay? And we thank God for groups like Odiko. They are on the beat, and we will all support them. We need to get to a point, and I agree with Mr. Kwati, that if we do some of these things, it will strengthen Parliament, it will strengthen the committees, it will strengthen the work of Parliament. So the technicalities notwithstanding, and indeed, I don't think the technicalities are a problem. We need to accept the fact that we have a problem with parliamentarians going to work. It has become endemic, it has become catastrophic. It has to be solved. We cannot leave it to only parliamentarians to solve, because Honorable Muntaka has shown us clearly that they will do everything to defend themselves, even if it means defending their
should the
opponents. And in this particular case,
should the speaker or should Parliament be accepting, as it were, petitions from ordinary Ghanaians for such purposes, other than those that are taken through to MPs?
Absolutely, because we need to entrench the principle that parliamentarians, and indeed ministers and others, are employees of the people. Our parliament is not sovereign. It is different from the UK parliament. And I don't want to go into the technicalities, why some of them will not be there. They are not sovereign. So we should take those petitions. Indeed, that is why there's a lot of push for even private members' bills. We need to make sure that we have a healthy interaction between Parliament and the people. There is a tendency for parliamentarians and Parliament to, go away from the people. They can easily lose touch with it.
The suggestion is that if you allow it that way unbridled, there's going to be the opening of the floodgates where political mischief, opponents will try to undo one another using that vehicle. But I practically have a problem with that, because if you have not absented yourself for 15 days, why should you be scared of anything?
Exactly. So if you have not committed that problem, there will be no situation where that will happen. And if it happens, it will be thrown away. That is one. Number two, it doesn't mean every petition will be considered. So indeed, there will be a system process that takes away all the rabble-rousers and the troublemakers. And then three, most floodgate theories are fantasies that never occur. There will never be a floodgate where people are going to be sending things. And indeed, Parliament will have a way of dealing with it.
Right.
So the principle must be clear that there must be a system in Parliament that allows citizens to participate in what goes on. But Parliament is a master of its rules. It will determine what goes forward and what does not go forward. And there will be situations where, even where there is merit, we can all listen and then after the debate decide that, look, this should not go anywhere. But we cannot have a situation where Parliament cuts itself off the people and then goes on and does things like what we are seeing now, where most of them don't go to work, and we will not have anything to say or anything to do about it. I believe the Speaker is right, and indeed, this protects Parliament if the Speaker would take these steps. Because if the Speaker doesn't take these steps, you will have court cases after court cases, and somewhere down the line, it's going to get, worse. So that House cleaning must happen. I don't think Muntaka should resist this.
Okay. Yes, people can't understand why, when we say, a meeting of Parliament, which is just between 12 to 13 weeks, and you can't avail yourself for that much. People are raising issues that the NPP, why are you targeting Adwoa for the way you are doing? Because now we're getting to know that she has more germane reasons not to be available, because of family issues, her child issues, and American social security matters, social welfare matters that may deprive her of her child and the rest of them. She sought permission, and then she wrote again to seek permission. And unfortunately, she must route it through her leadership. And the majority group didn't want to recommend the absence, the permission for her. So the Speaker has not also confirmed that. And she had to write directly to the Speaker to complain about the circumstance. And the Speaker referred that to the majority again, who were already, as it were, biased against her.
Samson, let me make this point. I'm part of the majority, and I can say without any doubt that an overwhelming majority of those of us on the majority side sympathize with Honorable Adwoa Safo. There are a few who have expressed some concerns about her absence in languages that we have all been disturbed about. I do not think Honorable Adwoa Safo is doing anything out of malice. I do not think there's any intention to undermine government or to undermine the caucus. I never believe that, and the majority of us on the NPP side, we don't believe that. So that point must be made clear. However, we ought to ask the question, is this about sympathy or it's about how Ghana's parliament works? That if a member of parliament was elected and for some reason outside their control, they cannot be in the chamber for the 4 years, that because the reasons are reasons that attract sympathy, and we all understand as human beings, then it's okay for the people of that constituency not to have representation for the entire 4 years, simply because the person is away for reasons beyond their control. We have to ask that question. And I think it's very easy to say somebody is targeting her because of politics. The last thing I would do is to target Adwoa Safo. She's my friend.
Maybe not you.
I just don't want to do that.
But we have heard the claims that because of her unavailability, you have struggled to pass E-levy, and you suffered a lot of embarrassment, and you blame all of this on her. At one point, she had to be put on a jet to come down, in a risky way to come and be part of the voting process. And all the rumors, I'm not supposed to elevate rumors, but the rumors that she suspected to have been the person who added her vote to the NDC for the speaker to be elected.
I don't believe
and
that.
So she has to be punished, isolated.
I don't believe that. I don't think it was Adwoa Safo that voted. Because I know Adwoa, I've known Adwoa since we're out of parliament. I don't think she did it, and that must be discounted immediately. I also do not think that when people blame her, you may blame her to the extent that her vote was not there to help the majority side get what we want. You may, to that extent, blame her. But I do not think you blame her to say that she's doing this maliciously. But as for...
Some of your people, including your leaders, have suggested that.
Look, that's what I'm saying, that the majority of us, and we have private WhatsApp platforms, we have discussions amongst ourselves. The majority of us believe that Adwoa Safo is not doing this maliciously. But all of us, including myself, also believe that the fact that her situation rather calls for our sympathy and support does not mean that the Parliament of Ghana must almost perpetually be without a member that has been elected to represent the constituency. We must differentiate two things. So I will be happy if, assuming, Adwoa is a woman of substance, but if there was...
If you have entertained such circumstances before, why her?
It's almost like saying...
Of course, because you have a hung parliament now.
It's almost like saying if we have entertained MPs absenteeism for so long, why are we discussing it now? There always ought to be a point at which we say we will do the right thing. So what I'm saying is this, that I believe that, and the majority of us on the majority side believe that Adwoa Safo is not doing this maliciously. And if anybody, and I've heard some comments, and where those comments came, many of us have discussed it amongst ourselves as unfortunate to let it seem to the public that she's doing this maliciously, when many of us believe that indeed she needs support. What I, for instance, cannot accept, however, and at the risk of repeating myself, should we allow a situation we sympathize with to, if you like,
deprive the people of a
I mean,
representation.
is it something we want to entertain? And I take a shot at my colleagues on the other side. We must be careful what we do about the institution called Parliament. This precedent that we will protect a situation that reduces the numbers of Parliament, never mind what is costing. So long as it could give us numerical advantage, we would support. We are setting a precedent that the people of this country do not need. And that is where I end. And I think the processes should continue.
If she's in such a circumstance, have you given her the opportunity at least to resign?
No, but you don't need an opportunity.
Because that's more honorable.
Oh, but you need an opportunity to resign.
We know. In government, you do this all the time. You want to sack people and you ask them to jump, rather. You let them resign.
Well, I think if a person considers that they are unable to fulfill the responsibilities for which they were elected for legitimate reasons, it is for them to say, look, I'm happy you voted for me, but I'm unable to perform these functions for 1, 2, 3 reasons. Therefore, I resign. I mean,
let me start with you on this note. What do you think the message out there that Ken Henry Korte, who we understand have been unwell for some good reason, have been seeking medical treatment out of the country and so on, and yet do not have the courtesy to seek permission? What does that tell you of the attitude of members to the importance of their job in the House?
I think we could deal with that. That you say there's been a general feeling that you can absent yourself and nothing will happen.
Because it's been happening.
He says that you ought to draw the curtain. I have no problem with that. But clearly, Samson, let's be frank, and I'm happy you say let's move away from the technicalities and deal with the real issues. The target is Adwoa Safwa. Let's be honest, let's face it.
And your protection is Adwoa Safwa.
Fine, so we are moving from the realm of technicalities to political interest and gains. Listen to your own member. Resign honorably before we table a motion to sack you. MPP MP to Adwoa Safwa. This is a member of the Privileges Committee. 6th April, even after the matter had been referred, he stated that Adwoa Safwa must resign, even without listening to her. A member of the Privileges Committee who has already made up his mind. And I was drawing your attention that on the floor, the majority leadership maintained that the Speaker had the right to refer the matter to the Privileges Committee. But he had no right to insist that the Privileges Committee
that's a constitutional matter.
Bring the report.
That's a constitutional matter. We will go there, maybe.
They say that the Privileges Committee should listen to them, rule, and determine, and that becomes finality.
Your suspicion is that
they have the numbers. So what will happen?
There are only one.
And he made the difference at the Finance Committee. At the Finance Committee, when we voted on e-levy, it was a tie, which meant e-levy would have then said
casting vote by the chair.
He gave a casting vote, and they have the casting vote on that committee.
And proudly so.
Yes. So beyond all these issues, beneath is the political game. Let's be frank. That is the whole issue.
But the Constitution says, and I think Kofi or you mentioned it earlier, you did. It says, if you shall vacate your seat, if you are absent without the permission in writing of the Speaker, and you are unable to offer a reasonable explanation to the Parliamentary Committee on Privileges. So we know these two gentlemen, that, these two men, that they have been sick. They have health issues.
Kweku has just confirmed that Adwoa even needs our support. She even needs our support more because she's also going through a very difficult situation. And it's not only on health grounds that you then say that
you don't know
you qualify. But he knows that she even needs our support. And yet members of the committee have already started
so they will use a subjective rather than an objective standard.
That is it. And that is what happens in Parliament. So they were insisting that at the Privileges Committee, let's end it there.
It shouldn't come to the House.
They will exonerate Ken. They will exonerate
Henry
Korte. Adwoa will fall in that.
You're contempting Parliament, huh?
If it came to the floor, what will happen?
You would see what will happen when they bring the report today. And I know you will be very much interested in the report. Because the report has to deal with these three. And the recommendations thereof for the House to
They
determine.
cannot justify the two when they are isolated. Is that what you're saying?
They can do that. And that's what the committee can. The committee can decide, having listened to the three, we are satisfied that as for these two, they have solid grounds. The House should let them go. But as for Ajua, we are not satisfied with her explanation. She should be expunged and the seat declared vacant. And you watch what will happen.
So if it came to the floor, it will be a matter of voting.
It now be a matter of voting. And my sense is that the majority must carry the day. So it will then be those for, those against, on individual levels. So you take Ken. The committee only recommends to the floor. Plenary will then take a decision. We can reject the committee's recommendation.
Ken will vote for himself. Henry will vote for himself.
Even another matter we must determine there. And even with Muntake's motion, we must even determine whether Ken and Henry and Ajua Safua can vote on that matter when it is brought before the floor. Because Muntaka is saying that the speaker cannot. If that is carried, all this issue of privileges and whatever is done.
But Samson, this is important. This is important. Given what I have read and my own belief that at the very worst, the constitution, the standing orders are ambiguous, and Order 5 gives the speaker the power to interpret in those circumstances. The speaker, I think, must make a determination whether to admit the motion in the first place.
If it doesn't, there's another route, and you know that.
That will be the courts.
No. You can get 1/3 of the members to sign, and then you move, I think, half-hour motion or so.
Sign a petition.
Yes. And then when we get
there
are so many other issues.
Yes, we can end this here, but let's hear, Kofi, if you have anything to say briefly in a minute, then we can take a break on this issue.
I think what is being glossed over is the legal proposition that these members have already vacated their seats.
No.
I think that determination in court is being looked over.
Based on what?
And it's a serious matter. Look, some of the people who have been mentioned, some of the MPs who have been mentioned are favorites of mine. I mean, I really want them to be in government. They are showing how good they are. But this also speaks to the fact that we need to have a pure parliament. We need to have the constitutional amendment to remove this requirement that ministers come from parliament, to make parliamentarians full-time parliamentarians and make them continue to be in parliament all the time. But the point here is this: have they vacated their seat according to law already? Or they are now going to be processed to, be determined whether they will vacate their seat or not. And I think that I agree with the opposition based on the wording in the Constitution and the law that by absenting themselves, they have vacated their seats. This process will not pass
Professor
through these things.
who mounted that suit, says that the Constitution talks about unexcused absence, up to 15 sittings in a meeting. In that case, the redress is through the Privileges Committee. That is clear, and the Asari case was not about that at all. The Asari case was about absence in excess of 15 sittings in a meeting. In that case, the court held that the seat is vacated automatically. It is not up to the Privileges Committee to excuse an MP from his job of representing his constituents. The rationale is that leaving the Privileges Committee to address all absences will reduce it to a political game. And the Amwatin outcome, where the Privileges Committee found that he had offered a reasonable explanation to be absent from Parliament, even though he was in a US jail. On how this should be triggered, I think it is clerical issue that must be handled by the custodian of the attendance register, who must do better at reconciling the register to reflect members in attendance at committees, so that those in committees don't suffer unnecessarily. I'm taking a break, but let me read two messages from two MPs. Now, Ejapa Mesa says that if JJ is suggesting that at the core of the Ajua Safo referral is some political game and proffers no evidence, Is that an admission that the NDC is also playing a political game? That is the question. Roxanne Dafiamapo says that the Speaker, it's obvious, is concerned about the image of Parliament regarding absenteeism, which must be dealt with. But let the point be made that Parliament is the only organ of state that you are entitled to enter on grounds of politics. So everything in Parliament turns on and around politics. Indeed, the Constitution even demands that when you get to Parliament as an independent person, you must partner political groupings to form a caucus group to constitute a majority side or minority side. I'll return to share some of your messages before we proceed to fact-checking Dr. Bawumia and his truths about the economic situation. We'll be right back.
COVID-19 pandemic changed the economic circumstances of virtually every country in the world. Today, our economy is witnessing rising prices of fuel and virtually all commodities like bread, rice, sugar, sachet water, cement, iron rods, and so on. From Malata Market through Abofor Market to Techiman Market to Takoradi Market Circle to Pando and almost everywhere across the country, prices are on the rise. In the first quarter of this year, we have also suffered a sovereign credit ratings downgrade by 2 ratings agencies. And along with that, there has been a significant depreciation of the cedi between February and March this year. These developments, ladies and gentlemen, have come as a surprise to many Ghanaians. The data shows quite clearly, when you look at this graph, shows a clear dichotomy for the depreciation of the cedi between 2013 and 2016 and between 2017 and 2021. Cedi depreciation reached a high of 32.5% in 2014 and declined to 9.7% by 2016. The rate of depreciation further declined to 4.7% in 2017 before increasing to 12.9% by 2019 and then declining again to 3.9% in 2020 and registering 4.1% in 2021. The data shows that the average exchange rate depreciation during the 2017-2021 period, the average exchange rate depreciation over these 5 years under our government is more than twice as stable as during the 2013 to 2016 period when the average depreciation was 18%. So you are comparing our average depreciation over 5 years of 6.8% to theirs of 18%. It's night and day. And you will see, in fact, when you look at the history of the Fourth Republic, the worst performances of the exchange rate so far since 1992, the worst exchange rate depreciation has happened in 2 eras, between 1993 and 2000, and between 2009 and 2016. Those are the worst performances in the exchange rate. I wonder who was in charge of the economy at that time. Ladies and gentlemen, so we had so much stability in the exchange rate. But in the first quarter of this year, 2022, we have seen the sharpest first quarter depreciation of the cedi since 2015. Data from the Bank of Ghana shows that at the end of March the cedi had depreciated by 15.5%. So what explains this? That you had such, low depreciation, and all of a sudden, within a few months, you had such a high level of depreciation. Why did we see this? A number of factors can be adduced to explain what happened. The financial markets assessment of the 2022 budget, unfortunately, generally concluded that our projected 40% increase in revenue, which underpinned the 2022 budget, the financial markets assessed that this was not likely to materialize. Essentially, the economy is what we feel in our pockets. I acknowledge that we are going through challenging times. This is the reality, irrespective of the cause. Not long ago, we had felt similar despair, the fear of losing our lives to a pandemic, and the near halt to our economy as we battle to survive each day. Some years ago, we had been confronted by very dire circumstances. The joblessness of our youth, the years of doomsday that adversely impacted on businesses and jobs, the disappointment of dealing with a collapsed national health insurance system, and the inability to access health care, the bane of the cash and carry system, a nearly collapsed national ambulance system, the freeze on public sector employment, and an almost collapsed banking sector, and so on. The economy was on the verge of collapse, and a legacy of take-or-pay contracts saddled the economy with annual excess capacity charges of close to $1 billion a year. These were basically contracts to supply energy to Ghana way in excess of our requirements, but we were obligated to pay for the power whether we use it or not. We were confronted with a banking crisis, and not dealing decisively with it would have meant disaster for the economy, as the entire banking system would have collapsed. In addition to not keeping up with the excess capacity payments for energy would have meant throwing the country back into the new bout of doomsday. The government of President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo put in a lot of effort to turn things around from the situation that used to be when we came into office in 2017. When you look at the sectoral growth, what is happening in agri industry and services, the data tells us that the agricultural sector has seen a major increase in output since 2016, increasing from an average growth of 2.85% between 2013 and 2016 to an average growth of 5.8% between 2017 and 2020. In fact, 2017 to 2020, our average growth in the agricultural sector is double what it was in 2013 to 2016. And this is as a result of the success of the Planting for Food and Jobs program. And the data for the first 3 quarters of 2021, in fact, shows an even higher growth. The first 3 quarters shows a massive growth of 10.1% in the agricultural sector. Now, when we look at the industry sector, it also saw a significant growth prior to COVID. Between 2013 and 2016, Industry recorded an average growth of 3.3% between 2013 and 2016. 3.3% average growth. Between 2017 and 2019, before COVID, industrial growth increased to an average of 10.8%, from 3.3%. This was before COVID. With the onset of COVID-19, as you can expect, industry growth declined to minus 3.6% in 2020 and minus 1.7% in 2021. Between 2017 and 2020, industry growth grew by 7.2%. The data clearly shows that overall, COVID notwithstanding, the economic fundamentals of inflation, interest rates, exchange rates, GDP growth, the trade balance, current account balance, gross international reserves during the 2017 to 2021 period are largely much stronger than they were in the 2013 to 2016 period. The fiscal deficit to GDP and the debt to GDP variables are weaker, given the COVID-related expenditures, banking sector cleanup costs, and excess capacity payments to IPPs. We should note that no government in the history of Ghana, no government has had to deal with a global pandemic which resulted in the worst global depression since the 1930s, and a war between Russia and Ukraine and its implications, and a financial crisis pretty much in succession. No government has been able to deal with these: the financial sector crisis, COVID, the war in Ukraine, and the pandemic. Under these circumstances, given what we have had to deal with, when you look at the fundamentals, our management of the fundamentals has been quite remarkable.
Remarkable management of the economy. The constitutional imperative in Article 36 is that the state shall, in particular, take all necessary steps to establish a sound and healthy economy. A sound and healthy economy. Is that what we have seen over the period from the political regimes all through to this time? And somebody works up some figures just to, tickle our minds. Says that from the 31st of, by 31st of August 2007, 100 USD, amounted to 92 Ghana cedis. Today, 100 USD amounts to 740 Ghana cedis, meaning the cedi has depreciated over 800% in just 15 years. And makes a comparison with Morocco and their dirhams, or how do you call it, that by 2004, 100 USD was equal to 900 equivalents of their currency. Today, 18 years later, 100 USD is equal to 1,000 Moroccan dirhams. What that means, make it out for yourself. But let's come to what Baumia has been talking about. And let me not forget to say that the program is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of Bank of Africa. Strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care services provider for 31 years. Waylead Properties, home is where one starts. Duraplast, Where Plus goes, water flows, Rehoboth Properties, quality housing for all, Trasaco Fast Floor, stronger, faster, and affordable. So thank you for your attention. I'll just read these few messages that you have sent earlier on the first discussion. Then I'll bring in Dr. Ejapoma Jakadako, who is Senior Lecturer and Economist, University of Ghana Business School, joining us for this second segment. This one is from Enam Ken. He says, based on the submissions from John Jinapo, I am tempted to believe that Muntaka was right with his actions. Then Kofi Amwa says, no one can blame Adwoa Safo for anything if that person has proven sense of objectivity. She doesn't exist on her own in Parliament. She has a majority leader. Why blame the horse when it has a rider? Latte Nyonu says Parliament may begin to explore other punitive measures such as suspension, a reprimand, a call to the Bar of Parliament to render apologies, financial penalties such as MPs forfeiting part of their salaries when they flout the constitutional provisions. Where we are learning all this from, they do all these things. They suspend salaries, among other things, and they reprimand. If you read the Eskime, parliamentary practice, it happens. But here, nothing really happens. Men's says that you see how both the NDC and MPP are defending the MP absenteeism under the disguise of profit-making activities. We ain't getting anywhere as a country. Eja Adam says, I think the majority MPP MPs should emulate what Minority Chief Whip Mohammed Muntaka Mubarak did to the Speaker. Nyavo Johnny says all the 3 seats must be declared vacant for by-election to be held. Simple. Well, we are broke. By-election costs a lot of money. And again, some free money will be there, Kwejo Edusei says the only thing that can fix our parliament is to amend the constitution so that MPs can't be ministers, can't sit on public boards, and they should only do parliamentary work and nothing else. A.B. Mensah says if it's possible, we should run parliamentary elections on non-party lines so as members of parliament will be accountable to the electorate rather than their parties. Gillian Jabba says this is even long overdue. Why would an MP deliberately be absent for all these times? They need to be sacked and made to lay the monies collected during the period. We want them to refund the monies they paid. A final message I read from PK in Elembele. He says it is a fact that that the NDC manage the economy. Okay, so we are going to the economy now, and in the course of that, we will see how it fares. Thank you very much, Dr. Ejapoma Jakadako, for joining us. She's Senior Lecturer and Economist, University of Ghana Business School. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Samson. Thank you for having me as well.
Right.
And good morning to your listeners and your viewers.
Great to have you. Thank you so very much for making time. So I began this by, reading from Oliver, Bakavomawo, who says, when you look at how our CD has behaved from 2007, it looks like we are driving this country economically eventually to a Zimbabwe situation where their dollar became so worthless. What do you say? We have explanation for all the troubles.
Yes. Samson, yes, we over the years, and I wouldn't say that it's just got to do with the current years, but over the years, we have not managed to stabilize our currency. And it's just because of the way we have decided to structure our economy. We having right from, let's say, independence, We haven't managed to take industrialization seriously as a country, and we are still depending on exporting primary products. And we know that if we do export primary products on the world market, we get next to nothing. We are still behaving like an import-dependent country. We are dependent on import. So, I mean, foreign exchange markets is a matter of demand and supply, and that's what works out. If you demand more currency, then you are supplying that currency, obviously you would find that that currency is going to be appreciating. So yes, we have not managed to take our industrialization seriously. We say that we have 1D, 1F. Some effort is being made, to be able to get the private sector to get into industrialization. But I think that we need to take that seriously. We need to also think about consuming made in Ghana goods. And as we are talking about consuming made in Ghana goods, it's important for us to also realize that if a typical consumer gets onto the market and wants to make any purchases, that consumer is going to be comparing the quality of a good that is being produced in Ghana to the quality of a good that is being produced outside. And if Ghana's Ghanaian-made products are not competitive on the market, obviously we are not going to be getting our local consumers to purchase those goods. Right. Yes, there should be a conscious effort for us to buy made in Ghana goods, but then we should also make an effort to make our products competitive on the market so that we can find long-term solutions to the problems that we have now. There are other reasons that we have done to actually get ourselves into this, and as we go on, maybe we can talk about.
So there's one fear. I need you to help me out of it. Things get worse. We hardly really get to a certain situation where what we are seeing now will be reversed in the sense that the prices that have gone up will come down. Will that ever happen?
I mean, typically, and especially in Ghana, prices are rigid downwards. So we never clearly see that prices are actually coming down. They are rigid downwards, and it's a market economy. And so you cannot actually push people to reduce their prices. What we need to do to stabilize our prices are the long-term solutions that we need to put in place to ensure that our prices or inflation doesn't actually go up. Now, we've been looking at, over the years,
Doc, my common economic sense or appreciation, which led to the question was, if we will recover, if we will get out of these circumstances, then I should be restored to where I was. So that if prices are going up as much as double, an item's price increases as maybe double, bring me to a place where it will reduce. And you say that will never happen. Then what's the meaning of the recovery?
Okay, so I am saying, so you see, where prices are also dependent on the sellers that we deal with every time. So yes, we are working at getting our currency stabilized. That obviously would get our currency to appreciate in a way, or even if we get it to the level that we get it, we expect that should reflect in the prices of goods and services once we do that. I mean, if we think carefully about fuel, one of the reasons why we are seeing a hike in our fuel prices is also because of the depreciation of the currency. So if we manage to get our currency stabilized, we are going to see that reflecting at the pump prices. And you are saying that we should be able to see that reflecting in goods and services. Hopefully, if we are able to produce enough and we are able to get the bumper harvest that we want to get, we would see prices coming down. But I'm saying that for the typical seller, if you see the driver and the transport fares going up, they're obviously not going to bring it down. The best we can get is to get it stable. And that's why in the first place, we shouldn't allow the prices to be high so that we will be comfortable in our zones.
If you had to make your assessment of Bawumia's presentation on the economy in some 3 minutes, what would you say?
Right. So I listened to Dr. Bawumia, and his speech was mainly about the state of the economy and where we have come from. He said in his speech that we were doing well before COVID. The figures are there. We can check what the figures are. So he spoke about inflation. He said that inflation was, and we see from the Bank of Ghana data sets that inflation attained single digits in 2018 and 2019. So as far as inflation was concerned, we managed to do something about it. He also spoke about GDP growing, and we saw that before COVID, GDP was actually growing. He spoke about exchange rate not really depreciating as much as we had before. He spoke about lending rates coming down. The figures are there. We can check those figures. And I was happy to hear him admit that we are in challenging times. And there's no doubt that we know that we are in challenging times, because at some point, one of the things that he said is that their performance had been quite remarkable. So just for the fact that he used the word quiet, clearly tells us that it hasn't been so remarkable, but it's been somewhat remarkable. And that boils down to the fact that over the years, we have not managed to build a resilient economy. And so with shocks here and there, we see that our economy keeps turning around every now and then. And so, well, I do get him, and I do hear him when he says that the economy was doing well before COVID. There's no doubt that COVID has actually put a strain on our economy, and it's not just our economy, so many other economies. So I do hear him when he says that. But it's also important for us to understand that the issues that have brought us this far are issues that require long-term solutions. And over the years, not just with this government, we have not been able to sit and get those long solutions across to ensure that our economy is robust enough to withstand all the shocks. If you take a look at our debt to GDP ratio, and for that matter, how much we spend on servicing our debt as a ratio of our revenue that we mobilize, it's still quite high, and it was still quite high before COVID actually set in. What are we not doing right? These are some of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves. We do have structural bottlenecks that we need to address as a country. And I believe...
Before we go to the long-term solutions,
yes,
you heard him speak about the, is it 50.1 billion exceptional expenditure, something we didn't plan to spend, and we had to spend on COVID. We had to spend on excess capacity charges, and then we had to spend on the financial sector reform. You heard him on that?
Yes, I did hear him on that.
And he says effectively that the economy didn't have this amount of money to spare. And so the problems largely can be attributed to this expenditure. You agree?
Yes, I agree partly. And like I was saying before, I mean, we have not managed to build a robust economy. But I do agree with him when he says that the financial sector cleanup it's part of the reasons that we are facing the issues that we are currently facing. The energy crisis that we had before is also part of the issues that we are facing currently. I do agree with him. And it's important for us to understand that the cleanup was very, very necessary. We needed to embark on the financial sector cleanup, but we didn't have the money to do so, and we had to resort to some borrowing to do that. Imagine one bank failing, the impact that would have had on our economy. We didn't have to sit and wait for the economy for the bank to start failing in the economy before we start doing something about it. So the financial sector cleanup was very, very necessary. Maybe the details of it was a problem, or the way it was handled, we could say that was an issue because people lost jobs, but we needed to do that. We also cannot take away the fact that part of the debt that we are incurring right now has something to do with the energy crisis that we experienced some years before. I mean, we were in there and we needed to get out of the energy crisis, and therefore we needed to borrow to solve our problems. And we know that debt is it's something that is accumulated over the years. So once you accumulate it, then sometimes you need to even go and borrow more to refinance your debts here and there. So we cannot talk about our problems without talking about COVID, without talking about the financial sector cleanup, without talking about the energy sector crisis. All these have amounted to the issues that we are currently facing. And I'm saying that there's more to that. If we had managed to build a resilient economy, if we had managed to mobilize the revenue that we needed to mobilize, we wouldn't have gone onto the debt market to be able to raise more debt to come and finance our issues.
So what do you say to those who say on these three issues, it can be said that this 50.1 billion is self-inflicted somewhat because, number one, the bank crisis, how to go to the rescue of the banks, there are those who disagree with the approach, using that amount of money for that purpose. There are those who disagree. I'm sure you may have heard Professor Stephen Ade speak recently about this. And then people are asking questions, but what happened to what was the assets of these banks? Because they were not without assets. What consequence has befallen those who supervise the regulatory sins? And we heard that they will suffer consequences. What has happened? It does appear nothing has happened at all. And in any case, in the bank crisis, the monies that were spent, have they not been passed on to the banks and the banking public through the financial sector recovery levy, which we passed a law 2021 for? Questions are being asked. The take or pay power agreements. Why should we continue to listen to a government that promised solutions and got power to fix what it said was broken, but continues to repeat the problem to us, that it is saddled with almost $1 billion each year for excess power? The past administration suggested to us that there was a plan for that, to export power. So why don't you follow that plan? If there is no plan, why don't you find a solution for it so that you don't end up paying and not getting anything out of it? COVID spending. Questions have been asked. How much didn't we get from the IMF and the World Bank? Who is accounting for that? So how can you claim that these three items are the reason for where the economy is when you have a handle over them? And in fact, when you talk about COVID, giving free water and the rest of them, are we not paying back? Because it's not free, as we got to understand shortly after we were getting to recovery from COVID. What do you say?
Samson, you see, whatever debt we manage to accumulate as a country because of all these issues have already been accumulated. If we are paying for them through levies, we are still trying to pay for them. But it doesn't take away the fact that the issues that we are now being confronted with are as a result of those issues that happened previously. Yes, there are levies that have been put in place that are meant to actually try to recover the debts that we incurred in those periods. We have the levy we have the COVID levy, we have the financial sector levy that we are still paying for. But it doesn't mean that the harm that was done to the economy as far as the debt was concerned did not take place. We have incurred these debts. We need to find out how we would be able to manage our economy to get around these things. And those are the questions that we need to be answering, or we need to be asking our leaders. Accountability is important. We got a lot of money from the IMF, we got some money from the private sector, etc. It's important they account to us. No doubt about that, as to how these monies were spent. But I'm saying that as we try to do all of these things, what's the way forward for us? How do we ensure that we don't get back into this situation? Remember in 2014, when we're going through the energy crisis, we got a bit into a situation like this. If we are taking measures to restore our economy and then looked ahead, if we had been forward-looking and taking measures to restore our economy, we wouldn't have come back to this problem. So it is important that we look ahead. These issues have occurred. We can't keep blaming all our problems on COVID, on financial sector cleanup, on energy crisis. We need to find solutions to these problems. And I believe that some of the solutions have been outlined here. We always talk about these solutions, but how are we going to ensure that this time we are going to be achieving what we have set out to achieve? I believe Dr. Baumia mentioned something like integrating all our card numbers onto the Ghana card. So our tax identification number was our Ghana card, and many other numbers were embedded in our Ghana card. But the question is, if people have tax identification numbers and we are not pursuing them to pay their taxes, how do they pay their taxes? People can sit in their comfort zone, in the comfort of their homes, and then be able to file taxes as he's mentioned. And so the processes of tax filing has been made easy. But the point I'm making is, if there's no enforcement, how do we ensure that people are paying taxes? In many other countries, you really find that these things have been tied up to essential services. You cannot do anything without showing your tax certificate. And these are the ways in which we can get people to pay taxes. We need to look at our expenditure as well. Be flexible in our expenditure. Yes.
Okay, so you catch a breather. Let me get to Kofi briefly before I come to the studio with the economists, financial people who are also MPs who are here in the studio. Okay, so let me get to Kwakwating first. People don't want to hear the refrain about COVID because they say the World Bank gave us money. At least initially we heard of the $430 million that the World Bank gave us. We heard of the IMF allocation of $1 billion US for COVID. So when we say COVID, people don't understand. And the World Bank has also told us that, you know, the economy was already showing signs of struggle before COVID. So you can't blame everything on COVID, so to speak.
I'll take both quickly, then I go into my main submission. Look, about 90% of all the support we got from our multilateral partners, the IMF, the World Bank, came in the form of loans. People have been thinking that when they hear this much, then it was free money. They came in the form of loans. We are paying interest on those loans. Those loans are contributing to the debt to GDP ratio we have been discussing. So let it be laid to rest. Let it not look as if during COVID, this government benefited from some grants and that we can't be complaining. That is the first point. The second point was what I think right now you raised 2 points.
Yes, I said you
apart
you
from
have
COVID.
answered the IMF and World Bank monies that came. That's not free.
Yes, loans.
Okay.
And then there was a second
and
point.
We have a COVID levy too.
Yeah, we do have a COVID levy, but as has been explained, levies take time to accumulate. And if you look at the rates and how much we've accumulated over the period, it is a small fraction of the problem we're supposed to deal with. I think it's legitimate for people to keep their eyes on these collections and to be able to say that at some point you have collected enough. But we just started, and so they're going to hurt us.
So look, people are saying the other part of the question. People are saying that stop talking COVID, Ukraine, and the rest, because the World Bank has confirmed to us that the economy was already in trouble before we got COVID, struck.
To the extent that Ghana's economy traditionally has had some challenges, our manufacturing sector has been weak. We are very much an import-driven economy. We do have corruption in our society generally, but also in the public sector. We see it in Auditor General's report the whole time, decades back. I think there is consensus that we need to reform our economy and we need to make our economy more resilient. And so if anybody says that even before COVID, your economy had some challenges, I would not dispute that, because I am one of those who believe that we ought to achieve political consensus to embark on radical reforms in respect of the economy and in the fight against corruption. So if anybody says there were challenges before COVID, I am not to dispute that. But it is important that we cast the current discussion in its proper context. Dr. Bawumia addressed the nation because we have always known these traditional challenges. But in recent times, beginning from in the first quarter of 2022, we have seen extraordinary developments that have gotten people complaining. And Dr. Bawumia did acknowledge that government hears the people. Right. And it started with first the downgrading. I'll go briefly into all that. The downgrading.
Yeah, let's do it this way.
Yes.
He brought us to know that the financial sector.
I'll go there.
The financial sector expenses, the excess capacity charges expenses, and COVID expenses got us to spend money we didn't have. 50.1 billion.
It was, yes, I'll even add a few.
Okay, 50.1 billion. Because now, the new thing I find from this presentation is this revelation. So the question is, were some of these not avoidable? And even if they are not, you didn't give any freebies. You claim you did, but we know that we are paying for almost everything. So what's the point?
Okay, of course, when the country gives you freebies out of the country's coffers, it goes against the accounts of the country. And the country at some point would have to find a way of recovering that. In difficult times, you take actions to deal with the difficulties. Later on, you see how you can recover lost ground. So that answers you. But back to the context.
The excess capacity
I'll come to them. It will distort my presentation. I'll come to them shortly.
Okay.
The context was that in recent times, we have been downgraded. And then we have seen the depreciation of the cedi leading to a rise in the cost of living. And then people are asking, what is it that government is going to do to deal with the challenges we are facing in our pockets? For many Ghanaians, that is a proper context in which you set this discussion. Dr. Bawumia gave two messages the day he did his delivery. The first was a message to the people, a message to Ghanaians. But the second was also a message to the critics, because in economic management, if you don't engage with your citizenry against things they're hearing, you do not carry them along. So it is important that you take time off economic management, respond to critics, to put the people's hearts at ease that indeed we are doing the best we can in the circumstances. So the first message to the people was, after acknowledging the rising cost of living and the need for government to act and act quickly, he outlined the interventions. And if you go to Dr. Bawumia's speech, in fact, earlier on, the finance minister had indicated a number of them. The expenditure cuts, where state political appointment holders would have their salaries reduced by some 30%, and those other measures. That in themselves did not come to much, I agree. But you see, there's a suggestion that charity must begin at home. If government was trying to carry the people along, government has to be seen to be leading the way. And so you saw those cuts. But there were very important expenditure reforms in Dr. Bawumia's delivery, some of which reforms, as I indicated, had already been suggested. You know, we set up public sector entities every now and then, even where there are institutions to deal with them. And we saw the GIF. I remember when GIF 2015 was being set up. I was then in opposition. And the very things that I said and the responses I got, they are the very things my colleagues in the NDC have been saying against the new institutions that we have set up, the development authorities. And they are the responses I got from the NDC, or we got from the NDC at the time, are the responses that we are also giving those critics. Government said in this intervention that there's moratorium on the setting up of new institutions.
Yeah.
People underestimate the significance of that, because as you set up the institutions, then you appoint people there, the administrative costs, and you're taking money away from critical needs into those ones. Part of the important expenditure, travels, that the conferences and all that moratorium. If you have to do it, if extraordinary circumstances require you to do it, come to the presidency and explain, and then you'll be given the chance. Earlier in this government administration, there has been a similar instruction on the purchase of new vehicles. Along the line, it appeared that somehow we were getting back to our old ways. The government has just put its foot down again and said those expenditures would also go. I mean, if you go to Dr. Bawumia's speech, you see the many interventions there. So he deals with the expenditures going forward. And then on the revenue side, you see the digitization and all the revenue measures that going forward we need to put greater urgency into in order to bridge the gap between our expenditures and revenues. So again, in communicating with the people, Dr. Bawumia did clearly articulate the things government is doing right now to respond to the recent rise in the cost of living. And then he hinted us that since the Bank of Ghana came out with its measures, since the finance ministry came out with those interventions, just announcing them, right, and since the e-levy was passed, all of a sudden the investor community is beginning to look at Ghana and say, maybe going forward, things would not be as tough as we thought when Parliament had approved expenditures to the tune of 135.6 billion. And in that approval, at both the finance committee level and at the plenary, we were unanimous. Not a single member of Parliament from either side said that these expenditures are too much. So we approved the appropriation. Then we came to the measures government intended to use to raise the revenues, to finance the appropriation that we, parliamentarians, had approved for government. then there was disagreement. And there were fights in the chamber. And if you look at the credit ratings, some of them made references actually to the things we're doing to ourselves in Parliament, that they were beginning to worry that even though the expenditures have been approved, we may not get the revenues to support those expenditures. It partly contributed to the downgrading of our economy. And then you see the investors now beginning to worry. So the figures are there clearly. If you go to the Bank of Ghana now, you realize that people then started saying, I don't want to roll over my investment again. When my investments are due, I want to cash them, buy dollars, and disappear.
I hear blaming the downgrade, but
it was part
I
of it.
don't hear why the downgrade.
That's what I've explained. The downgrade is what I have explained, that when your parliament approves expenditure to the tune of 135.6 billion, and that same parliament had approved revenue to a tune of 100.5 billion, and you say you have a deficit of 7.4, agreed. Then you go to that parliament, the people's representatives, and they say the expenditures are good, even though you had indicated to them in the presentation of the budget how you intended to raise revenue to finance those expenditures. And then when it came to raising those expenditures, the bills, the instruments to activate the way government said it was going to raise revenue to finance those expenditures, then the House no more agrees. And for 4 months, if I am an investor, I'm not thinking about your country, I'm thinking about my investment. So the investors then said, the rating agencies and the investors, the international community started seeing that these guys, they might spend money they do not have because they are struggling to even institute the measures to finance the expenditures that have been approved by Parliament. That was fun. If you read the records of the narratives of the credit rating agencies, this is very clear that they did not trust our fiscal. So from the downgrades, the investors who, of course, are also relying on these observations then said, I'm not going to roll over. Then your CD begins to fall. Then the ordinary man begins to take the hit. So in simple terms, some of the instability we have seen in the last quarter is coming from the fact that we did not demonstrate that the fiscal was reliable. So having done that and explained, and Dr. Bawumia did explain all this, that having seen this, it is government's job to find a solution. So government says, one, do all you can to push for all the revenue measures that were indicated to finance the 135.6 billion appropriation that both houses approved. Do whatever it takes. So you saw a certain agency and a determination, and especially the majority side, to ensure that the revenue measures, including the e-levy, are passed.
Right.
That was the first thing government did. And then two, government said it's not enough to continue raising revenue. Taxing people is not a comfortable thing. We have to begin to cut expenditure. So you see the expenditure cut announced by the finance minister, but also explained by Dr. Bawumia in his presentation. And it does not surprise me that the investor community then begins to say, okay, these guys, now we see a change in the outlook. That is why the CD is beginning to see the stability. Okay. I don't know how you can explain this any other way. So it tells you that the difficulties we have experienced recently could have been avoided if we had demonstrated during budget time that we can finance our expenditures. I'll come to the point about 2019, there were problems already. But quickly, it is just to make the point that Ghanaians can have the assurance that in response to the challenges, government has done things that are beginning to show in the stability of the city. If we continue like that, I have no doubt, and that is my prayer, that by the end of the year, the credit rating agencies should come back and upgrade us. As soon as they do that, you would begin to see our economy showing greater strength to investors. And then your CD will have the stability you need. Then the cost of living will be checked. Even though the current stability would help, we should deepen this by working towards an upgrading of Ghana's economy, getting to the close of the year. That is when we are going to hear from these credit rating agencies again. And the job for all of us is now to hold government to the commitment about expenditure cuts and the revenues that they have made, that have been clearly explained. Now, that was so much the message for the ordinary Ghanaian, and I think we should all put our prayers behind government. I think the stability we're beginning to see in the city is good. I have heard Ghanaians, full-blooded Ghanaians, almost telling the investor community that vacate the confidence you're beginning to have in the economy and don't stop disinvesting. And that these government measures don't come to anything.
Oh, really?
I have heard Ghanaians say that. They won't come to anything. It's all a fluke. And the current stability in the city is a 9-day wonder. I'm appealing to all of us that we can do the politics when we want. But where we have gotten to now, we need to sing with one voice to convince the investor community that at least let's give government a chance to make the interventions that it has announced work. If it doesn't work, trust me, if the interventions don't work, trust me, down the year, we may even see further downgrades. And at that point, government will not have any excuse because you yourself committed to do these things. Now, let me go to, after communicating this message and asking Ghanaians to support the government to make these interventions work and inviting everybody, including the opposition, that at some point you should put a break on the politics and back government to stabilize the city. Now I go to his message to the critics. And that is where this point about excess capacity and all those things come in. It was not the objective of Dr. Bawumia to mount stage and to just tell Ghanaians that these guys signed dubious excess capacity contracts because they wanted to take kickbacks. And it has become a burden on us, and we are now having to finance those things. That was not Dr. Bawumia's intention.
You have been telling us that from day one,
yes,
when you took over power, and you promised us that you were renegotiating these contracts. Are you still renegotiating? And if the renegotiations are not working, you have just thrown your arms in despair. You are saying that what? You can only complain about them?
You're not just complaining about them, but you see,
that's why I asked the question. They had a plan. They said they were going to.
I understand that. It's the most ridiculous point.
If they didn't have that plan, maybe you claim. Can't you also think outside the box? Just paying $1 million, is it $1 million annually for nothing?
Samson, I'm in a hurry to respond to the issues you're raising. Look, first point. You see, Dr. Bawumia would have ended his presentation with acknowledging the problems, indicating what government was doing, observing the outcomes, the stable outcomes.
You've done quite a bit of time, so you can go straight.
I'll go straight. Would have ended it there. But he needed to respond to suggestions that have been made that weaken people's confidence in what government was doing, and that even weakened people's confidence to pay the taxes they are supposed to pay. So he needed to address that, and this is how he addressed it. He says, look, this plenty public debt and all that you are talking about, this is how it came about. Some of them are not things that we had control over. First, those contracts, and I say this because, look, unless we call people out, it is not just an NDC administration that would do this. In future, you would have even people within...
You're still not speaking to it. I need to take a break.
I'm going. What I'm saying is that the excess capacity charges are part of the reasons we are where we are. Whilst you take steps to deal with them by imposing those levies, by cutting expenditure, it does not mean that in explaining why we're here, you ought not to mention them. That's the excess capacity charges. And he said it's export.
We have spent how much so far? 17?
The excess capacity? Yes, 17 billion.
17 billion?
Yes. In excess capacity, something we could have avoided. I have heard suggestions that, we had the intention to export. If you want to export power...
First, the 17 billion. In July 2021, a question was put to the minister by Al-Hassan Sohini, Tamale North. So he asked the Minister of Finance which independent power producing companies have received payment from the government of Ghana for excess capacity charges and how much was paid to each company in the last 4 years? The answer he got was this: Mr. Speaker, the underlisted independent power producers have received payment for excess capacity charges for the period under review 2017 to 2020, totaling $937.50 million US dollars. So AXA, Car Power, and Send Power, he listed them, and that's how much the total came to.
Well, the figures here are up to date. I have to take these figures.
From 2017 to 2020,
yeah,
the payment was less than $1 billion. And
USD.
Yes, USD.
That comes to
and we
how much
continue
Ghana
to tell
cedis?
the public that we pay annually almost $1 billion US dollars.
Yeah, Samson, we can audit how much we pay. We can audit and get the figures. We should not allow that to get in the way of the fundamental fact that we are having to pay for these excess capacity charges. And if anybody wants to do an audit and correct the figures, that is okay. The figure Dr. Bawumia provided, the 17 billion, I'm sure it would have been given him by the technical people. And at least for our purposes, we know it informs us about why our debt levels are where they are. Now, the export question.
You are extending one of these contracts, the AXA or so. You are extending the duration by another 5 years. If you have been saddled with such a humongous, unconscionable deal, why do you want to extend?
There's a general moratorium on the signing of new capacity contracts. There is.
Binds you to extend them.
I'm coming. There's a moratorium. But for this particular one, I'm not in a position to explain why, but I would imagine that there will be a special reason why this has become an exceptional case. But I am encouraged by the general moratorium that the Energy Ministry, you are not allowed to sign any additional SS, even though we are beginning to eat a part of that gap. But let me quickly address the export question. Before you decide to sell power to anybody, you must go to the person and negotiate a price and negotiate an agreement. And then you would know, you can calculate your own cost of production and see whether it even makes sense to produce for that person to buy. When that has not been done, and you produce the power and say, I intended to sell to who? I think that point is misleading. These were contracts that were signed because people wanted to take kickbacks. Yes. You should learn a lesson from it and move away from it.
You have not attempted that plan in 5 years.
Look,
you are only comfortable just paying.
Look.
Yeah.
A lot has been done in that area.
Okay, let me take a break. Let me take a break. When we return, and forgive me, my production, they have been on me to go a break for a long time.
5 minutes.
When we return, we'll hear from John. We'll hear from John, and then we'll hear from you again. We'll be right back.
No, it's true.
Welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. And my guests here in the studio, Kweku Kwating and John Abdullahi Jinapo. And we have Dr. Japoma also on Zoom with us. And I must state that I have received information that updates the payments to the IPPs that as at February 2021, the Finance Ministry had paid 12 billion to the IPP since 2017. Yes, John. Yes, John, let's hear you.
Let me, I have very limited time, but let me see what I can do.
You have a lot of time.
14 minutes.
He had 25 minutes. You have a lot of time.
What we are talking about is simple. We are in a difficult situation. Fuel prices have gone up by 70% this year, almost 70%.
Right.
Today, our fuel is the most expensive amongst 33 African countries. Transport fares have gone up by 15%. Tuesday is going to go up again.
All right. So, and sorry, please forgive me. The updated spreadsheet on the payments I have received confirms that 17.3 something
from which
has been
because
paid.
I want to deal with it.
This is from the presidency.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
If you pay 17 billion, it will show in the budget. It must reflect in the budget. Kweku is here. Take the budget and show me where we've made provision for that payment. What Dr. Bawumia did was falsehood, and I'll deal with it clearly because I want to deal with these issues with facts. Now, what are excess capacity? We are talking of power that you haven't consumed but paying for. Is he saying that we didn't consume power worth 17 billion and yet we paid for that amount? This is ECG's audited account, 2020. The power they bought is here, 9.37 billion. This power purchased in gigawatts, it is 12,706 gigawatts. Now, what are their collections? 3 billion. There's 6 billion. There's a shortfall of 3.3 billion. In the previous year, it was the same amount. It comes to 6.8 billion. It is here. That 6.8 billion was paid by government. This is their financial statement. We are talking of power consumed, but because of the poor state of ECG, because their losses have run up to about 30%, when they buy the power and they sell the power, they are unable to pay for that power. So the Minister of Finance steps in and pays for that money bought. And Dr. Bawumia goes to hold a press conference and says that it is excess capacity. That is most unbecoming of a vice president. It's so unfortunate for the vice president to reduce himself to that level.
Which level?
What you are paying for is power consumed. In 2019, they brought an amount of 5 billion. Kwaku, it is here. We asked for the details. 2019 what? Payments to IPPs.
Yes.
Car powership. Letasco. Letasco supplies fuel. If the plant is sitting idle and it doesn't work, do you pay for fuel?
But there's nothing here to show that it was payment for current consumption.
I'm saying 2019 payments.
Payments, but that is not a consumption.
We are talking
period.
of excess capacity.
Okay.
Excess capacity simply means you did not run the plant. And I'm saying that in order to pay for fuel, it presupposes that the plant would have been running. Is that not it? This is a company, Stratcom. This is a company that belongs to Kenneth Orat's relative. They paid them 331 million. What they did is that when they came to power, they quickly went and formed this company in 2017 and decided that they should be supplying the fuel. If the plants are idle, the plants are not running, do you give them fuel? Because you only need to run the plant if the fuel is available to you. But if the plant is sitting idle, it doesn't produce, how do you pay for that fuel? This is simple logic. So they put all together.
But you need to give us that evidence.
It is here.
It's not there. What you're showing is they are
this is 20.
See, I don't want to interrupt you, but
Kwaku, this is performance statistics.
Yes.
ECG.
Yes.
Sales. Purchases, what is this? 2019, 11,000. 2020, 12,000. The sales itself is what? 9.3 billion. Then the revenue collection is what? What is this? 5 billion, 5.8.
But what does that got to do with the payment schedule you showed
What
me
it
earlier?
means, wait. What it means is that out of 9.3, they were able to collect only 5.8. So there's a deficit of about 3 billion. Then you go to their audited financial statement. This is audited financial statement. Their revenue is what? 6 billion. Government grant is what? 6.8. So government is paying ECG to pay these IPPs because they did not collect the monies. Yeah. And I'm saying you lump all that together.
Why do you say it's been lumped together?
That is
when you go to the schedule that Samson has been giving.
And I've given you a schedule. I don't have time. I have a lot to deal with. I have given you a schedule presented to Parliament. Not somebody sitting at the residency and sending a message.
Please, you don't.
This is a schedule presented to Parliament by the finance minister. I am a member of the committee.
John,
I'm stating
all I'm saying, sorry, half a second. All I'm saying is that the payments you're showing here
yes,
have no relationship with the earlier schedule you showed me. It is wrong to assume that simply because some monies have been paid to ECG, that those payments have been captured in the 17 billion that we are. There's no evidence.
I'm saying that the finance minister appeared before us and said, I've paid capacity charges of 3 billion. And we insisted that we want the breakdown. So this is the breakdown. In that breakdown are fuel cost. And I'm saying fuel cost in our sector does not constitute a capacity payments because you must consume that fuel. If you consume that fuel, it is not capacity
So you're
payments.
not speaking to the 17 billion?
I am speaking to the 17 billion that was presented to Parliament.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing.
Okay,
that in Parliament, we vetted the issues and came to a firm conclusion that what he calls capacity payments.
This 17 billion has not come to Parliament.
I am talking of capacity payments he came and presented to us in 2019. So please don't miss the issues. I maintain that these so-called capacity charges are nothing but energy that has been consumed. Provide the evidence, Kwaku. You are alleging that it's 17 billion. I don't even need to provide the evidence. All I need is to challenge you that I disagree with your 17 billion.
We can invite the minister.
Provide the evidence.
We can invite them.
The vice president was most disappointing. He says that, look, COVID and the Ukrainian war are the causes of the woes or the problems we are facing. Is that not what he says? Go and read the Bank of Ghana's own summary and financial statistics. Don't go far. Just read what the Bank of Ghana presents. And I'm going to provide you with evidence.
Bank crisis 25.
I've dealt with capacity charges.
No, I'm not talking capacity charges. You just mentioned COVID and Ukraine. And I'm telling you that he mentioned also the bank crisis.
I'm taking them one after the other.
Okay, go ahead.
So I've dealt with capacity charges. And I'm showing that what the vice president did was nothing but actual consumption. Because in 2020 alone, and if you read the energy sector report.
You are going back to it.
Fine, I'll finish it. Now he says that COVID affects the whole world. Is that not it?
Of course.
It affects Togo, it affects. And yet the Ghanaian cedi is the worst performing currency.
Not at the moment.
As was posted by Bloomberg. So how does COVID affect only our currency? No, you understand. How does COVID choose only Ghana and decides that only Ghana, your currency, should fall that much? Doesn't make economic sense. And he has the audacity to look into our face and tell us that our cedi is depreciating because of COVID.
I've explained it.
Now go to the reserves. And I told you, read the Bank of Ghana report. August 2021, our reserves was 8 billion. By December, it had dropped from 8 billion to 6 billion. It had nothing to do with e-levy. Check it, because your reserves, when there's a run on you, you go into the reserves and use part of it to show up. So this your issue of e-levy has nothing to do with the worst performance in terms of the credit rating. The truth is that we've borrowed so much and spent very little on the productive sectors. I was listening to them, 2019. We had 1 billion from oil. Our trade balance was 2 billion. And yet the cedi depreciated by 12.9%. In 2016, when we didn't have that, the cedi depreciated by 7%. And he himself told us that, look, if your fundamentals are weak, the exchange rates would deal with you. And that's why he said that, look, the signs began to show in 2019. They did not hit, they did not take any caution. Because when you read the 2021 mid-year review budget, and you look at industry, you look at manufacturing, you look at financial sector, all of them were performing poorly as compared to 2016. And you can check from the budget. I will give you the page and the paragraph. So clearly, we're on a downward spiral. This is a government that tells us that they are running the deficit under 5%. Consistently. Our GDP is growing above that deficit. Samson, if you have a farm or a business, your deficit is below 5%. Your GDP is growing. And yet your debt has ballooned to over 80.1%. Does that not tell you that there's something wrong? Does that not tell you, look, there's something fundamentally wrong with what the vice president is saying? Because in simple logic, your deficits add up to your debt. So if your deficits are that low and your GDP is growing that fast, it means that your debt to GDP must grow at a very slower pace. It's simple logic. But yet today we're doing 80% in terms of debt to GDP. But you see, going forward, we are not saying that people should withdraw their money. We are saying that we've heard this before. In 2001.
You want to say something again?
He asked us to pay COVID levy, sanitation levy, energy sector recovery levy,
health recovery,
financial recovery levy, health. We paid all those levies and even told us our salaries would be increased by only 4%. And yet things went out of spiral and today we are in this mess. And he decides that he won't deal with the issues.
But as we speak, the city is showing signs of
stability.
That is what happens.
That's what I wanted to show him.
The city moves up and down. But when you look at the trend, clearly things are very, very, very difficult for the ordinary Ghanaian. And I expect them to do some bold measures. I looked at all his measures.
No, something he
but look at the measures. The finance minister tells
the measures are not far-reaching.
You listen. The finance minister says that we'll cut expenditure by 20%. That's what he says.
Now, additional
the statement is here.
Plus additional 10 now, 30%.
So when you cut 30%, how do you achieve a
discretionary expenditure?
No, wait. Let's assume that what you are saying is true. You cut all this. How then do you achieve a deficit of 7.5? Meanwhile, he insists that he will achieve a deficit of 7.5 because your total expenditure is 135 billion. Your revenue is 100 billion. If you cut expenditure by even 20% of 135, that amounts to 27 billion. And yet the finance minister insists that his deficit will be 7.5. Okay. That is why we say that, look, all they are doing is the normal rhetoric. He won't accept responsibility. He will blame it on Mahama, blame it on so-called capacity charges, blame it on so-called banking sector issues. He himself would not admit that government has made some mistakes in terms of where you are putting the money. Because you know that this government borrowed 1 billion to settle IPPs. So in terms of
we have run out
their refinancing.
We have run out
for 3 years, that money has been sitting, and we are paying 8% on it.
Yeah,
look, Samson, we are in this mess because Dr. Baumia and the economic management team have failed woefully to appreciate real-life economics. The theory is not working, and it will simply not work.
There are those who have listened and say he's convincing, he's dealt with facts, and they feel that there is hope. Even though you have groups like Fact Check Ghana.
Let the first communicate our
The Fact Check Ghana that has fact-checked at least 5 issues and found that the claims to be either false, completely false, inaccurate, or misleading. But generally, you say we are back on a trajectory to recover.
Yes, and I say again that our growth in close of 2016 was 3.4. By 2019, it has improved to 6.5. Our lending rate was 28.09 at the close of 2016. By the close of 2019, it had improved to 23.65. Inflation, we inherited 15.4. By the close of 2029, we're at 7.9 single digit. IMF bailout in 2016. By 2019, we had exited. Credit ratings by 2019 had improved. There's every evidence
all right,
that the system was better.
My guests have been John Abdullahi Jinapor, MP Yape Gusoku, and member Finance, Mines and Energy Committees of Parliament. Kweku Kwarteng is MP of Boase West and Chairman Finance Committee of Parliament. Kofi Bento was with us earlier, lawyer and Vice President Imani Africa. Dr. Ejapoma Jekedako, a senior lecturer and economist, University of Ghana Business School. I'm Samson Lardy Anyenini, and my outfit, as always, is by Habil Scooter. You can contact them at Adjuringano Gates, East Legon. The contact line is 0200 84 1988. Have a good afternoon.